You've already mentioned that Mr. Bligh was told to do immediate findings in the immediate period after the accident took place. I mean, looking at your report, Mr. Bligh, it doesn't appear to be a root cause analysis. I can't see any evidence of that, and I wonder why that was the case.
So as Tony said, our objective was to, as quickly as we could, to understand the sequence of events, remembering that at the time it was a horrific incident to look at, and we were trying to understand what were the chain of events that happened and what were the immediate causes, so that we could get to some insights as quickly as possible. That's what we've done. I think that it's a good contribution in developing understanding, and it's the case that there may be more to do. You make
okay. I mean, on the basis of that, though, do you have, or does BP as a whole have any sort of feelings, indicative feelings of a sense that is there one thread of causality through all of this, or is it a series of threads?
Well, I think it's important to consider all of the 8 things we've identified and recognize that any one of those could have prevented, had the barrier remained in place, could have prevented or significantly reduced the impact of the incident. So there's a way to think about each of those and how would you strengthen them. And the recommendations that we've made are targeted at exactly that, at thinking through what steps would you take, and they range from consideration of engineering design, consideration of improved standards and practices and proceduralization of the things, and then consideration of how do you, in cases where we're buying in or acquiring services from contractors, how do we up our game in ensuring that we get absolute quality there? So those are sort of the broad themes that we went after in the recommendations.
I guess what I'm trying to get at, I mean, Dr. Hayward inherited a pretty tough situation with regards to the safety record. I mean, that's when you were appointed, that was, you mentioned that straight away. And I'm wondering, are you still dealing, and we've heard in the FT today at the front page, I mean, do you think you're still dealing with that legacy of sort of lax safety culture that the Baker report of the Texas City refinery explosion indicated? I mean, do you think that what we're seeing here is you're still working through that? And dare I say it, is there some sort of institutional issue here? I mean, I'd be interested to know what you think.
I think it's very dangerous to join up dots that may not be appropriate to join up. As I don't think we've got any evidence here of the sort of issues that we were confronted with at Texas City. What we do have, and I think very clearly, is a lack of rigour and the quality of oversight of a contractor. Now, the contractors we're using here are of world-class, world standard, and you may not expect that they would need that quality of oversight, but it's clearly something that was found wanting. And it's something that the report makes strong recommendations around, and it's something that we have already taken action on. We clearly didn't wait for the report to be published to begin taking action around the extent of the oversight that we apply in our drilling operations, be it in the cementing area or in the overall drilling area. And I think that is a legitimate concern, but I don't believe that ties back to the issues that we had at Texas City.
But you do intend to do a root cause analysis at some point in the later report, is that the plan?
This report satisfied our terms of reference that we were asked to do, and I've given it, provided to the company, and that it will be thought about.
And bringing it sort of closer to home, in view of what happened in Macondo, were detailed plans in place to handle a failure at a subsea wellhead here prior to the incident in Gulf of Mexico?
I think it's evident, and we have certainly acknowledged it, that the industry was not prepared to deal with a subsea blowout in 5,000 feet of water. The reason we were not prepared is we believed we had effectively mitigated that risk such that it was not going to occur. Now, that's probably was not the right conclusion on the part of the industry, with the benefit of hindsight. So over the course of the last 4 or 5 months, we have built an enormous amount of capability, as you've seen in the Gulf of Mexico, to be able to intervene in the subsea environment through the creation of a whole series of essentially capping mechanisms that would allow you to cut away any debris and put a cap on a blowing out well and contain it. What we're doing for the North Sea is that we are, as we speak, shipping 2 of those capping structures across to the UK to be based in Southampton at the Oil Spill Response Centre as the beginning of creating the capability to be able to intervene if such a situation did occur. Now, that doesn't mean to say there's no lack of focus on mitigating that risk and ensuring it doesn't occur, but I think, as our industry colleagues described to you last week, the industry in the UK is moving forward to create capability to deal with a subsea blowout, and the first step of that is, as I said, to bring 2 of the multi-purpose capping pieces of equipment to the UK to be based in Southampton with the oil spill response.
Just one final question with regards to the sort of day-to-day management on a functioning rig. I'm a practicing medical doctor, so I speak from a position that my profession is whistleblowing. It's difficult. It's got a track record in the NHS of that being there's no particular system in place, and it's something which we're having to address as a profession. And it strikes me that most people, if not all people on the rigs, are under contract, maybe directly or indirectly, to BP or whichever company it is. Do you think that that is a problem in terms of reporting concerns? And do you think that there would be, perhaps, for the sake of the industry, because as someone who understands what we need to be drilling because of the need for oil, etc., but for the sake of the industry's reputation, that there would be some sense in having an independent person on the rig who says, look, I'm not happy about this, because at the moment, potentially there's a conflict of interest and people are under pressure, contracts, money, etc.
Well, I think, there are lots of things that could be done, but I do want to stress again that we found no evidence of anyone being under any pressure to do something they didn't want to do. And I think perhaps more importantly, the offshore installation manager of the Deepwater Horizon testified under oath at the Marine Board. He is the ultimate authority on the rig. He said that at no time had he felt he was under any pressure to reduce costs or to go quickly. And if he had have been, he'd have told whoever was trying to do it to please desist, because as far as he was concerned, he was the accountable person, and he made certain that those pressures did not apply on his facility. So I think the rules, whilst it's tempting to believe that this was causal somehow in this accident, there's no evidence for that whatsoever.
I'm not suggesting that it is. I'm just suggesting that maybe in terms of management of reputation of the industry and individual companies, that it might be something worth considering.
If I could add just a comment on that, just to help you understand what is in place in the UK today in the North Sea. 2 things, both of which are legislative requirements. The first is the requirement to have a group of people offshore known as safety representatives who are volunteers. It's a legislative requirement. And their job is as much independence as anything else. And in fact, when I go offshore to facilities, I do often, I meet with them independent of the management of the facility to understand if they have issues with the management of the facility, if they have issues that they want to bring to my attention. So that just in terms that exists today. The other thing that you'll see when you travel to an offshore installation is people are encouraged, and there are posters around the place, that people have direct access to a hotline in the Health and Safety Executive should they wish to raise concerns, and people do use that facility. So they're the things today, not saying that it doesn't need to be enhanced further, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood what was in place in the North Sea today, and maybe it's something we need to do more of, but that is in place today.
Can I move on to the use of dispersant during the spill response? Can I first just quote from a BP document released June the 19th, the frequently asked questions document, dispersant background. Our initial tests show that when we apply dispersants underwater at the well site, we can use much smaller amounts of dispersant than we would need at the surface and achieve the similar results. They also show that we can use dispersants underwater in good or bad weather, day or night, when other methods of containment can't be used. And I emphasise that that kind of information might be helpful to other companies in the future. Would you agree that statement's got a rather glib quality to it? I mean, I say that because it just appears to suggest the Gulf of Mexico is now being treated as a vast laboratory experiment on the environmental impact of a deep sea oil spill.
Well, I'd conclude that however you interpret that statement, that was not what was intended. But there are some important facts, which are facts. What we found through the application of dispersants in the subsea environment was that the volume of dispersant you had to apply was much smaller than you needed to apply at the surface to achieve the same effect. And the reason for that was that the oil and dispersant were travelling through a mile of water and mixing very effectively as they went through that water, something rather like a washing machine. Now, what I think I can say about this is that no one knows today the environmental impact of this. There is lots of speculation, but we have a very substantial science program in place measuring the water column and the marine fauna and flora in an enormous amount of detail to determine what, if any, environmental impact there has been from the application of dispersants. And I think it's fair to say that time and science will determine precisely what, if any, environmental impact there has been.
I mean, your oil spill response plan contains a section discussing the permission process for the use of dispersant. I mean, dispersants are specifically designed to work at the interface of air and water, and I can't see any reference to it being used at depth in your plan. So I just wonder, what was the process whereby you got permission, that you made the decision and you got permission to use the dispersant in that way, when, as you've just declared, you have no idea what the environmental impact will be, that ecotoxicology studies were not done, I mean, if you're spraying it at that sort of level, that sort of pressure, you can get a substance formed and you don't know whether that's going to float to the top, float to the middle, or stay at the bottom. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns here, and I mean, I'm pleased to hear that there's a science operation in play, but where are you going to start looking? I mean, it's impossible to predict where this substance is, and how are you going to deal with that? I mean, that sort of unknown as to where to look.
I think it's very important to recognise that the application, firstly, the dispersant was approved by the US Environmental Protection Agency. Every application of it, be it on the surface or in the subsea, was approved by the EPA.
On what basis? Because we hadn't done it before.
Well,
I mean, if I inject a drug into a patient, I sort of need to sort of have some evidence I know what it's going to do. I mean, I can't. I mean, looking at it from a layman's, I mean, no expert. You're essentially saying we're going to try this, but we don't actually know what's going to happen, and we don't know what the long-term consequences are, which have issues for BP and other companies with regards to liabilities. I just wonder how the US authorities made that judgment. Maybe, I don't know.
I think it was a belief that it was going to be more effective applied at depth. Now, it was a theory. It turned out that indeed that was true, that the volume of dispersant applied to create the same effect of physical dispersion was significantly less when applied at the source than applied on the surface.
And was that, I mean, presumably you couldn't have created those circumstances in a laboratory, so I guess that was just a bit of a punt, was it? Was it a scientific punt?
It was a scientific theory which was
Okay.
applied and proven to be accurate, actually.
All right. I mean, do you have any sense of what the medium, sort of longer term environmental consequences are going to be? And I sort of bring that over to the UK continental shelf. I mean, it's a totally different environment, but presumably if the same thing happened, you would attempt the same thing. I wonder, do you have any sense, in view of the fact that somebody's come up with the science about what it might do at source, do we have any sense as to what it might...
I don't want to project or predict the outcome of the science program. The only thing I can tell you is about the data that has been collected so far.
Okay.
So the data that has been collected so far, there is no evidence of dispersants or oil entering the food chain. There has been a very extensive program of sampling of marine fauna and flora, and there has been no evidence of it entering the food chain. There has been no evidence since the 20th of July of any oil or any dispersants being retained in the water column. There was for a period during the spill, but since the 20th of July, all of the sampling that has been taken across the water column at various depths has not identified any residual oil or dispersants in the water column.
And one final question. I mean, in view of all this, and it does strike me as an ongoing experiment here, and as someone who wants a vibrant, successful British oil industry, I'll declare that. It surprises me that there's no environmental representative from BP here today. I mean, am I to be concerned by that?
I don't think so. I think we have a fairly significant environmental capability that is, frankly, will be enhanced as a consequence of this, of course, because there are lots of lessons here. There are lessons in this accident across many dimensions. And one of them is the area that you're referring to. The application of dispersant, its effectiveness in mitigating an oil spill, and its impact on the environment. And a lot of good science will come out of it. And I believe strongly that we should allow time and science to determine exactly what the consequences are. All I can say is that to date, what I've described to you.